I want to welcome everyone to day 2 of our 13th annual Adam Smith Week, sponsored by the Center for Public Choice and Market Process. I'm Professor Peter Calcano. I'm the director of the Center for Public Choice and Market Process and a professor of economics at the College of Charleston. The mission of the Center for Public Choice and Market Process is to advance the economic, political, and moral foundations of a free society. We've got an exciting week of programming, so I want to please ask you to review the schedule. It's go.cfc.edu/ASW. We will put that in the chat so that you have that and you can go out and register for more events in the future. I want to encourage you all to look at our webpage, our Facebook page, follow us on Twitter and Instagram to learn more about the center and our activities both this week and in the future. We are fortunate not to be celebrating Adam Smith Week alone this year. We have 9 other centers and organizations that are joining us and offering events and sponsorship as part of this week's program. For this event alone, we have students and faculty from 16 colleges and universities joining us today. Today's speaker deserves some recognition for these events as the president of the Charles Koch Foundation, which has been a supporter of the center since its inception. I again encourage you to check out our webpage to learn more about our programming in the center. Right now, I want to introduce you to one of our public choice associates, Kelly Lifshitz, who's going to introduce our speakers for this afternoon. Kelly?
Hi, thank you. Very excited to get to introduce our speakers for this afternoon. So hello, everybody. First, I will introduce Dr. Robert Salvino, a professor of economics at Coastal Carolina University, who will be moderating our conversation today. Dr. Salvino has taught and researched at Coastal Carolina University for the last 15 years. He is particularly interested in urban and regional economics, public choice, and the economics of entrepreneurship. He has taught courses in these fields and has had related research published in the Review of Law and Economics and the Journal of Entrepreneurship and Public Policy, among other well-respected journals and books. In addition to his work as a professor, Dr. Salvino is now the director of the Grant Center for Real Estate and Economics at Coastal Carolina. And a fun fact about Dr. Salvino, he received a Gibson Les Paul guitar for Christmas. All right, now I'm very excited to introduce Mr. Brian Hooks. Mr. Brian Hooks received his bachelor's degree in political science from the University of Michigan before going on to work at the Mercatus Center, a university-based research, education, and public policy center at George Mason University. Mr. Hooks was the director of Mercatus's Global Prosperity Initiative and Social Change Project before spending 10 years as the executive director and COO of the Mercatus Center. Mr. Hooks is now president of the Charles Koch Foundation, as Dr. Calcano mentioned, and he is the chairman and CEO of Stand Together, a philanthropic community that works to empower over 700 business leaders and philanthropists. Mr. Hook now lives in Alexandria, Virginia, with his wife and daughter. He is the co-author of Charles Koch's upcoming book, Believe in People, Bottom-Up Solutions for a Top-Down World, which we have the privilege of hearing him speak about today. I'll now turn this over to Dr. Salvino to continue with our presentation. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Kelly and Pete. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for taking the time to be with us here today. And as Kelly said, Believe in People, Bottom-Up Solutions for a Top-Down World is the subject of our conversation and the mission of Stand Together. So, Brian, before we begin today, I'll provide a quick background of Adam Smith Week for our audience, and then I'll turn it over to you for some opening remarks. And before I do that, and I'll repeat this again after I finish my remarks, audience, you do have the opportunity to get involved in the question and answer toward the end of this session. Use the Q&A feature on your Zoom panel at the bottom. All right, so thank you. Adam Smith Week is a celebration and deep dive into the principles and institutions of a free and civil society and the fruits of the same. Past speakers for Adam Smith Week have included Vernon Smith, Nobel economist, Nobel Prize-winning economist, who has helped reconcile Adam Smith's 2 major works, Human Nature is Both Non-Cooperative, dealing with the self-interest and markets aspect, and Other regarding the sympathy and friendship relations that he discussed in his other work. More importantly, he argues that reciprocity in both settings maximizes the gains from social exchange. Many of the speakers this week are well aware of the positive causal relationships between economic freedom, freedom from corruption, and economic prosperity. However, communicating these ideas to a more mainstream public has been challenging, to say the least. In a recent Cato conversation with Peter Gettler, you, Brian, along with Charles Koch, mentioned a statement that Russ Roberts made, possibly from one of his great econ talks, and I'm going to paraphrase, but he said, "These economic ideas that I just mentioned are profound, but no one is going to sing campfire songs about them, certainly not." You said it yourself, and I agree more than I can describe. People will sing campfire songs about the people and their stories in this book. Believe in People, Bottom-Up Solutions for a Top-Down World. For our audience, I just want to say again, get the book, read it. It is phenomenal, and this session cannot do it justice. I'll just repeat that again. I would argue that a firm understanding of Adam Smith is helpful for anyone trying to really embrace the ideals and beauty of the miracles. And I do not think I'm being too sensational, but the miracles documented and dissected in this book. You brought out the human element front and center. You've made social entrepreneurship every bit as cool and rewarding as entrepreneurship. You've been recognized by 2021 Time 100 Next. Priscilla Chan wrote your piece, your bio piece. For those who don't know, that's Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg's wife. You work on prison reform with Stand Together, showing many people the power of these ideas when put into action. So quickly, let me thank everyone again for joining us. You'll have the opportunity, as I said before, to submit your questions for using the Q&A feature. Pete will help us moderate that. Brian, before we begin, I want to express again how fortunate we are and how thankful we are to have you here with us today. But before we dive into it, I'll turn it over to you for some opening remarks as well.
Well, thanks, Rob, and thanks, Pete, and thanks to everybody who joined today. I would be remiss to not start off by just acknowledging how excited I am to be able to participate in Adam Smith Week, and how really cool it is to see the cooperation between so many universities. It's extraordinary that you guys have gotten everybody together, and I guess the digital platforms made that easier, but nevertheless, you know, I spent 14 years of my life at George Mason University at the Mercatus Center. And so to see on the screen here, you know, what's going on at the College of Charleston, the Center for Public Choice, you know, when I started at Mercatus, I was down the hall, literally 5 or 6 doors away from Gordon Tullock. I'd see him every day in the kitchen getting coffee. So public choice is kind of, it's part of, it's in my blood. And then of course the Mercatus Center, you know, back in our early incarnation was the Center for the Study of Market Processes. So I've been looking forward to this, and I really value what you guys are doing. I really appreciate all the work that you and the other universities that are part of this event this week are doing. We'll get a chance to talk more about this, I hope, but I truly think that the work that you all are doing as scholars and educators is some of the most important work that's happening in the country right now. So thanks for having me. You know, and Rob, thanks for the generous introduction, and especially the kind words about the book. And we're very excited about this book for a lot of reasons. You know, we're coming out of a year that has really, I think, to my mind, brought the principles that drive human progress into focus. People are kind of reeling from all sorts of experiences that we've had, many of them very tragic over the past year. But even before that, you know, people were looking around the country and sort of saying, there's got to be a better way. We ought to expect better from each other and from the experience. And as they look around, you know, a lot of people are grabbing at ideas that, you know, and the work that you guys do would demonstrate are the wrong ideas. And so what this book tries to put forward is a better way. It's a guide for people who are asking the right questions and looking for what do we do differently? What can we do to really realize the potential in all of us and in our country? And so the book puts forward 3 big ideas, and these aren't ideas that will be new to anybody on this call, I'm sure, but I think they are ideas that are very relevant for the time and will do well to the extent that more and more people grab onto them. The first idea is that the solutions to our country's problems will need to be tailored. There's a lot of problems. There's going to need to be a lot of solutions, but those that work will all have one thing in common, and that is they'll be grounded in a sincere and deep belief in people. And that sounds trite. When you say that, of course we believe in people. But no, in fact, when you look around and you look at how many of the systems in our societies are organized today, they betray the fact that our society really thinks that a whole lot of people don't have much to contribute. And we got to reverse that. We got to shift that paradigm if we're really going to kind of get on top of things and continue the trajectory of progress that a lot of you have documented, that economic and other freedoms have brought to us and the world over the past couple hundred years. So solutions start with a belief in people, the idea that everybody's got a gift, everybody's got something to offer. And to the extent our institutions are organized to help people discover and apply that gift in a way that helps others, we all do better. Again, an idea that's as old as Adam Smith. The second big idea is that solutions that empower people from the bottom up, rather than control people with one-size-fits-all approaches from the top down, tend to work better. And they respect the dignity of every person. They help to enable the kind of discovery and kind of entrepreneurship and generation of knowledge that can benefit society. And so we ought to encourage those bottom-up solutions. We ought to help people to see the solutions that mirror those principles. And then the final one, I think, is one that we try to take very much to heart, but is too rare, I think, in our country today. And that is that we can get a whole lot more done when we unite with anyone to do right, as Frederick Douglass said. When rather than spending a whole lot of time trying to identify how we're different and then really drilling down and focusing on those differences, however important they may be, let's spend at least as much time, I would argue more time, looking for the common ground that does tend to unite us. And then by partnering, and again, an Adam Smith idea, sort of practicing this division of labor, recognize that we can accomplish a whole lot more by working with people rather than sort of focusing on dividing people. So those are principles that I think resonate certainly with my experience, with the work that we did at George Mason, and I know the work that so many of you guys are doing in your centers. But the challenge is, as you mentioned in the intro, Rob, is how do we get those ideas out into the conversation in a way that really resonates and people feel like they can grab onto them and use them as a guide for their actions. And so we tell stories about how people have done that throughout history and how people are doing that today to overcome some challenges that otherwise would be holding them and our country back.
Right on. Yep, absolutely. And as you say these things, I mean, things that are just popping into my mind: spontaneous order, decentralization. And just this morning, I saw an email from Bastiat Society, and I remember speaking to them a long time ago down in Charleston about decentralization. And, I think about that, I almost laugh now, because certainly market-based management principles, which are based on these bottom-up approaches, when you say decentralization, a lot of people really have no idea what you're even talking about, certainly in the mainstream. And so you've really hit on how these ideas can be applied in practice, which is actually the basis of market-based management, which a previous book that Charles Koch did talked about market-based management. But I don't want to forget that is, these ideas in this book and these stories, they are unbelievable stories. But for those trying to understand how Adam Smith relates to this market-based management might be something that kind of reminds people. So I'll ask you a question. Some in our audience might be familiar with market-based management principles based on the principles of the market economy and their role and success at Koch Industries. But talk briefly about how Stand Together in particular equipped social entrepreneurs with MBM, market-based management, to grow their impact. Some of the stories show in the book.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, market-based management is a toolkit. It's a management philosophy, but it's based on the ideas and the principles that underpin a free and open society, right? And so it's a learning what's driven social progress throughout our history. And in the book, we try to document those lessons. We cite heavily from people like Deirdre McCloskey and others who will be familiar to this group in doing that. But if you understand what's driven progress in society, really this notion of liberation and empowerment, right? The more and more people that have been brought into a system of equal rights and been given the chance to apply their gifts in a way that benefits themselves by benefiting others. As our country has brought more and more people into that system of freedom, we've all benefited. And so the challenge then with market-based management is, well, how do you replicate that kind of success by applying those principles within a firm? And so, if you ask Charles, he'll tell you that is really what is primarily responsible for the growth and success of a company like Koch Industries over the past several decades. And so, as you say, we at Stand Together, we work with social entrepreneurs, people who are finding new and better ways to help others to overcome the barriers that are holding them back throughout all of the different areas of society. And one of the ways that we work with them is by coming alongside them to help them grow their organizations by applying those same principles that have been so effective in our society and in companies like Koch. So this is a really cool opportunity for us. So in the book, we tell stories about some of these social entrepreneurs. A guy like Scott Strode, for instance, who's just a phenomenal guy, a guy that I've gotten to know over the past 4 or 5 years. Scott started an organization called the Phoenix. And the Phoenix is a peer-to-peer addiction recovery organization that has effectiveness rates that are twice those of the best clinical programs. Most people that go into the Phoenix programs, they experience recovery over the long term. And they do it, Scott does it based on his own personal experience. Scott struggled with substance abuse disorder for about 10 years. And so he knows what it means to struggle, and he's applied some of what worked for him in empowering others to overcome these challenges. And so it's a wonderful program. It's a program that believes that just because people are struggling doesn't mean that they need to be written off. They've got a lot to offer. We just got to come alongside them and help them to realize their potential. So Scott knows how to deal with addiction in a way that we'll never know. And so it'd be ridiculous for us to come in and say, hey, Scott, you've been so successful at this. Let us tell you how to do your job differently, in supporting them, which sounds ridiculous, but it's the way a whole lot of philanthropy works.
Sure.
We don't tell Scott how to handle addiction, but one of the things that we can help Scott with is how do you scale the organization? So when we met Scott, he was in 7 cities. He'd been at it for about 10 years. And in the last 4 or 5 years, we've helped Scott to expand the Phoenix to about 50 cities. And he's now on track with a new expansion project to empower 2,500 chapters around the country to help about 1 million people through this program, which will make him one of, if not the largest addiction recovery programs in the country.
Wow.
Kind of change the whole paradigm for how we handle a challenge like addiction, not one that writes people off with things like methadone and others that says, hey, look, we'll help you get comfortable, but you don't have a lot to contribute. That's wrong.
Right.
Scott says, you got a lot to contribute. We think that we can help you to realize your potential. And through Stand Together and our work with them in bringing resources like market-based management into them, we're helping him to scale. And so that's a lot of fun. And we do that with all sorts of different organizations.
So literally empower is one of your 3 precepts. And so empowering not only Scott, but also the people that Scott is trying to help. And
You got
it's
it.
a fantastic theme throughout. I'm also, as you're talking, I'm reminded of how one of your other precepts, unite, just bringing different people together. Just last night for Adam Smith Week, when Jonathan was speaking about safetyism on college campuses, and then at the end, he mentioned Van Jones. And Van Jones is another person mentioned in the book. I won't go too much into it, but it's just so interesting. I think it would be, just fantastic. There's so many people spring to mind that I could just see conversations happening with them and saying, let's think about the principles of the market economy and how these could possibly expand the impact that you're trying to have. And Van Jones' quote, I mean, it was a fantastic quote about really empowering people, right? He also has worked with your organization. I'll let you speak more if you like, but more specifically, I want to talk about another aspect. So we've got the three precepts of the book: the believe in people, unite with anyone to do good, and empower, right? But then also important 4 particular institutions that you're trying to impact, the institutions of society. And so I'll just list those for the audience, but then I'll let you speak on those. So we have community, education, business, and government. Can you elaborate on the paradigm and what roles these institutions play in society?
Sure. So there's nothing all that special about the way that we kind of describe the different areas of society. You get a lot more granular than those 4, or you can simplify it further. But the idea here is that a lot of people are feeling that they're being left behind in the country right now. And there's a lot of ways to describe that, but the American dream seems like it's slipping away for a lot of people. And so you ask the question, well, why is that? And the data bears that out as well, especially, and there's a very unequal distribution of outcomes throughout different geographies throughout the country. I think you guys probably have had some people talk through that this week, or certainly you're familiar with it. The question is, why is that? And a lot of people who come at it from sort of this top-down paradigm will say, well, look, it's just the pace of change, right? Things are moving fast these days, and some people just aren't going to be able to keep up. And if that's your paradigm, well, that's going to lead to some pretty ugly consequences, conclusions about, well, what should be done then? And so what we do is we put forward a different explanation, and we say, well, look, if people are falling further behind, it's not the pace of change. It's the fact that the institutions that we rely on as a society to help equip people with the skills and the values and the experience that they need to discover how that they can contribute, whatever the situation, those institutions are failing them. And so sure enough, when you drill into the data, that's what it bears that out. And so we look at institutions, as you say, like education. The purpose of education ought to be to help students and everyone to discover their gift, develop the skills that they need to express that gift, and then apply that gift in a way that benefits themselves by benefiting others. And for a lot of people in our country, that is what education does, but for an increasing number, it doesn't. And so you say, well, wait a minute. If we're not actually, investing in people through education in a way that helps them to do that, of course, they're going to fall behind. And so education is an institution that we say, look, if we really want to realize the promise of our country, we've got to invest in education, the institution, in a way that works for people. And we go through each one of these institutions and try to diagnose what is the deficiency, and therefore what is the opportunity to improve that institution such that it empowers people, again, from the bottom up, to find new and better ways to contribute based on their individual gifts. And if we can do that, the pace of change isn't slowing down, and nor should it. If we can do that, we can help to see a future where people continue to see opportunities to contribute in the lives of others. And through a lot of the concepts that you listed before, the spontaneous order, the division of labor based on comparative advantage, these sort of foundational principles, we can see progress in the country kind of along the lines of that hockey stick that we all know so well, and that Deirdre does such a good job of describing.
Okay, so let's start the next conversation piece on education. I think a lot of in our audience, certainly everyone's going to think of higher education, right? But there are some particular aspects that your group is focused on. I want to talk about youth entrepreneurs. So tell us about how Youth Entrepreneurs is doing some unique things that's talked about in the book.
Well, so Youth Entrepreneurs is a great example. It's a program that's now in almost every state, started 35 years ago in Kansas. But it's a great example of what we call three-dimensional education. And this is, we describe as the ideal way to understand education. Education shouldn't be one size fits all. It shouldn't be sort of cookie cutter. It should be tailored to the individual in a way that helps them to go through those three dimensions I mentioned a minute ago. You got to discover your gift. It means you got to have some trial and error. You got to be able to try on different ideas. You got to be able to try on different paths, learn what doesn't work, which is often as important as learning what does work for you. But once you've discovered your gift, then you've got to have the chance to build the kind of skills and values that are necessary to express that gift in a productive way. And then the third dimension is some practical experience, right? Some opportunity to kind of try it out and applying that gift so that you can hone it. And as you do that, you're going to be equipped to go out into the world and contribute based on who you truly are. And there's a lot of education that does that. And I know that a lot of the people on the call today are practicing that kind of, whether you call it three-dimensional or not, you're practicing that. That's sort of in your bones. That's why you've chosen to be educators, because you do the work to help students to really kind of, discover how they can contribute. But for a lot of students, that's not what's happening.
Sure.
And we can talk about how that's distributed and some of the causes of why that's not happening. But Youth Entrepreneurs is a program that tries to to do that and tries to equip teachers, in this case in high schools, who have the passion for bringing that out in their students, for sort of implementing that kind of three-dimensional education. And in a nutshell, what Youth Entrepreneurs is it's a program for high school kids that is taught within the schools, primarily in public schools, where students have the chance to kind of learn the skills and values that are required to start a business. And there's different aspects of that, including some business plan competitions where you could actually win some capital, to whether you're going to invest that in your business or in your further education or whatever. But the point is not to help to empower a bunch of new business owners, though that does happen. The point is that by learning the kind of skills that are required to be successful in business, learning things like, respect for your customer, learning things like math, right? Learning things like, how to express an idea in a way that's persuasive so that people are interested in the product that you've got. All of those things are life skills that if they're taught in the abstract and they're just sort of, students are kind of sheep dipped into those lessons, a very small percentage of students come out having gained that kind of practical knowledge that'll be valuable to them. But if you do it through a program like Youth Entrepreneurs, and there's lots of other programs that take this approach, you see extraordinary success. You see students who are failing because they were just disinterested, right, in the one-size-fits-all approach to schooling. They turn into your top students, and we tell some of those stories in the book. The most recent data that I've seen on this is that something like 70% of high school seniors report that they're completely disengaged from their studies.
Right.
And that is a number that rapidly declines from elementary school in terms of the engagement. If you're completely disengaged, there's no way you're going to get on that path of three-dimensional education. And so what we put forward in the book is that we need a paradigm shift away from the student is there to sort of go through the school to we need an individualized educational experience for every student. And if that sounds crazy, it's not, right? You can do that at scale. We're working with not just Youth Entrepreneurs, but guys like Salcon and others who are demonstrating that that is possible. And ultimately, I think that's what's going to be necessary to really have the institution of education fulfill its function in our society, in our free society.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so I think one of the great things about the book is it does show, as you read through these, that the institutions link so quickly and they're so closely related and important to consider it that way. Anton Luckey is someone in the book that I would probably put in the community aspect of institution. But what you just said about find your gift, the book talks about the North Star and Frederick Douglass. Tell us a little bit about Anton Luckey and how that affects communities as an institution, the story there.
Yeah, I mean, what the book really tries to put forward is a thick description of a classical liberal vision for what it means to live well with each other. And so each one of these institutions plays an important role. And the idea that the institution of community is critical. Again, it's not a new idea for us. I mean, you go back to the classical liberal scholars. This is central to the work that they do. I mean, this is Tocqueville for the 21st century, basically. And Anton is a wonderful story of what this looks like. Anton, I'm going to see him this weekend, actually, is a guy from South Dallas. He is one of the most extraordinary leaders I've ever met. And he spent the first 20 years of his life kind of going down the wrong path. Grew up in a very rough neighborhood, probably one of the roughest neighborhoods in the country. Started the Bloods gang in Dallas, which became the largest gang in the city, certainly one of the most violent, when he was about 14. Went to prison, and in prison, he had a transformational experience. And you can't make this stuff up. If you ask Anton how he actually sort of began to see a different path for himself, he read everything that he possibly could. Read everything in the prison library. And one of the books that he read was Plato's Republic. And he says the allegory of the cave really is what did it for him. He said he realized that he was in the cave and he wasn't seeing reality, he was seeing shadows. And so when he started to see the light, that he could apply his gifts not just to lead towards violence, but to lead people towards a better way. He had the choice. He could just kind of go off and realize a better way for himself, or he could go back into the cave and pull those out who were left there. And that's what he's dedicated his life to do now. He's a big part of a group called Urban Specialists that works with kids and former gang members to chart a better course, help them to develop their gifts in a way that benefits others. Anton's a social entrepreneur, and he's having an outsized impact by practicing the principles of classical liberalism of human progress in a way that is making his life a whole lot more fulfilling for himself and more productive, but having a huge positive impact on society through building stronger communities.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I do want to mention in the talk that you had on Cato with Charles probably last month, I think Charles mentioned that Anton, of all the business entities that Koch Industries had acquired, and all the executives that were part of those companies trying to learn market-based management, and I've gone through market-based management training at Koch Industries as well about 10 years ago. He said Anton Luckey learned it faster than anyone he had ever seen, right? Embraced the principles. And I think to your point, and classical liberalism's point, bottom up, spontaneous, not just spontaneous order, but no one would have picked Anton Luckey to be someone who would have been able to do what he's done and transform people for good, right? He probably would have been ignored, right? I mean, in the prison system, and this is something that also Stand Together has been fantastically successful in, is rehabilitating or reshaping the criminal justice system one piece at a time, but it's impacting communities, right? And certainly there is a strong link between how education is missing a lot of people and how that's impacting communities, right? There's another story in the book, and again, I just want to say to the audience, it is so hard to really just grasp these stories. How I guarantee you, I may be just an artsy fellow who likes to play guitar, but there are stories in this book. There, no question, you'll have to put it down and walk away because they really just strike your heart. There's no question about it. Cafe Momentum is another one that's similar to that, and Chad Hauser and what he's done with Cafe Momentum. If you can speak on that.
Yeah, no, that's right. Chad's another guy that I'll see this weekend, headed down to Dallas. Yeah, I mean, these are examples of what it means to practice the principles of human progress. The notion that everybody's got a gift, and if our systems are designed to write people off, which so many of them are right now, we ought to expect people to kind of, become destructive. If we organize our society so that it only benefits a few, and it excludes people like those in the juvenile justice system who have made a mistake, pretty soon we're going to find out that it's pretty lonely, and we're going to miss out on the contributions of incredible people. And so what we argue for in the book is, as you know, Rob, is that we think that you need to transform society. You need a paradigm shift away from this sort of exclusion mindset towards one that includes many more and more people in the principles of a free and open society. And what Chad's doing at Cafe Momentum is incredible. And with with COVID hopefully going away, or at least making it so that we can interact again. If you ever get a chance to go to Dallas, eat at Cafe Momentum. Chad is a guy who was at the top of his game. He was one of the best chefs in Dallas. He had a ownership stake in a restaurant. He kind of caught the wave right when chefs became celebrities. And so he was on a great track. And he changed his life because he had an experience where he got to interact with some kids that were in the juvenile justice system. And he opened Cafe Momentum as a place for kids exiting the juvenile justice system in Dallas to come and to work for a year. He does a year-long fellowship with these kids. And these are kids that they enter the system, 50% of them will be back in jail within a year. The people who work in the juvenile justice system have a name for the kids that they oversee. They call them throwaway kids. think about that term. I mean, if you needed you couldn't invent a better term to describe that paradigm that writes people off. Throwaway kids. These are not throwaway kids. But the system basically puts up all sorts of barriers once they've gone in that makes it very difficult to succeed. And the stats bear that out. Kids that go into Chad's program, 85% of them never go back to prison, never go back to jail. And what does Chad do? He puts his arm around him and he says, hey, I believe in you. I don't know what your gift is, but we're going to work damn hard to find it.
Right.
And as you discover it, you're going to find new and better ways to apply it so that it's going to benefit you and benefit others. And that's what happens. And through a restaurant. And the coolest thing to me about Chad's story, I've eaten there a number of times. This isn't a place that you go and you say, well, I guess we're going to have to do some good and we'll have to kind of bear it, but we're going to take one for the team. This is one of the best restaurants in Dallas. Nice. So these kids are performing at the highest levels of their industry because somebody said, hey, we're going to treat you with dignity. And we're going to bring you into the opportunity to find your way to contribute in the lives of others. And again, I think this is a modern day version of what Adam Smith was writing about in both the Theory of Moral Sentiments and the Wealth of Nations. And you see these examples all across the country. We say in the book is that the solutions to our country's problems are all around us. We're just looking in the wrong places most of the time.
Right. Yeah. So. You mentioned dignity and again, just believing in people. And I think certainly maybe younger members in the audience are students at college and also high school. It might be surprising that it is so difficult for nonprofits in particular to go out and actually make a real positive and significant impact and really impact a lot of people. And I think that's something, empowering these organizations. And again, not knowing where these great ideas are coming from is part of the magic of certainly of classical liberalism. But stand together, reaching out and helping these organizations along. I want to ask you, I think Stand Together is involved with over 700 different businesses and organizations around the country. Can you tell us, what are you seeing right now, a particular opportunity that interests you that Stand Together is really excited to be helping?
Well, what we do is we work with organizations within each one of those key institutions. So about 300 different universities, a couple of hundred different community organizations, 700 business leaders, and then millions of public policy activists that are doing what they can to help support public policies that help to empower people to improve their lives. And when you put the combination of those together, it's very powerful, and you can make a real difference in terms of changing the conditions away from exclusion and towards empowerment and inclusion. And I think that's the answer to your question is to the extent that more and more people are recognizing that the biggest challenge in our country right now, I'll call it the crisis of liberalism, that I think is probably more dire today than certainly at any time in my life, is a recognition that the future of our country really is not going to be about left versus right. It's going to be about empowerment. Are we going to commit to the principles of a free and open society, the principles of human progress? Are we going to commit that our society is one that includes and empowers everyone to contribute versus one that bets on exclusion, top-down, one-size-fits-all control? Because we're seeing that being proposed from all different areas these days. Right. And those people like you guys that are really doing the hard work to answer the tough questions about what do we do, how do we apply these principles in a way that's productive. That's the opportunity. It's how do we continue to bring folks like you and others who are committed to that vision of a free and open society in a way that helps empower people. How do we help to connect you and bring the resources to you so that you can show people who are understandably frustrated with what's happening in the country today that there's a better way. And that's what we're dedicated to.
All right, very good, very good. Yeah, and so certainly behind that is leaving behind this partisan approach, this dichotomy of there's good people up here and bad people down here, and instead seeing where we have similar aims and working together to try to solve problems of society.
Yeah, you got it. And the more and more we put ourselves out there, and the more I think a lot of people are experiencing this, there's a real willingness. I mean, that's the cool thing that about my job is I get to meet people from all different parts of our society, and by far the majority of people, they want to help, they want to contribute. Not everybody knows how, but when they see an opportunity to do the right thing, more often than not, they're going to do that.
Absolutely. Yep. So I'll just, I think we're getting close to time for Q&A. But I do want to just close this part of the session by saying social entrepreneurship, is the big theme in the book, but also entrepreneurship and how, I mean, business people, why social entrepreneurship, even for them, matters. And I think you guys talk about in the book, look, we're all social entrepreneurs, whether we are, the CEO of a major corporation for business, a small company, whatever it might be. We also all are social entrepreneurs, and that public good externality aspect that, that helping our community or whatever it might be is one way that we're going to help bring these principles back into the forefront and get people to believe once again that people, believe in people, empower people, and unite for good.
Yeah, I know you've got a lot of business students in maybe on the call today or participating this week, and I think that's so important. The point that you just made, it's the role of business in society is to create value. And in a free society, business is the productive engine. And so to the extent that businesses are behaving in accordance with those core principles of human progress, the sky is the limit, right? Profit then becomes a scorecard of the value that you're creating in society. And that value chain is expansive, right? And so if you're organizing your business in a way that empowers your employees, man, they're going to have a great life, and they're also going to find new and better ways to contribute to your business. You're going to do even better than you would otherwise.
Absolutely.
And if we spend most of our waking hours at work, whatever our work is, and if our experience is at work in those waking hours is one that is consistent with these core principles, we're going to develop the habits of liberty, right? The habits of a free society, and those habits are going to spill over into our interaction with others. But if it's the contrary, right? If it's businesses pursuing profit through the political means, for instance, something that public choice economists have really unpacked and documented, then the employees are going to develop those habits as well. Right. And that's going to contribute to the decline of our society. So business can play a wonderfully and they do play a critical role in advancing this sort of vision for a society of empowerment and production. Or they can be part of the problem. And, right now you got businesses that are doing both. And I think the more that students that come into their careers as business leaders who understand their opportunity to do well for themselves by doing well for others, so this notion of mutual benefit, and by practicing these principles and being principled entrepreneurs, the better off we're going to be, because there's a ton of value and a ton of energy in the business sector that is too often sort of left on the sidelines or not thought of as a critical part of what it means to live well together.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I'll just close quickly before we go on to Pete. You said principled entrepreneurship. Thank you. And yesterday, Michael Munger was talking exactly about what you just said, right? And quoted William Baumol in The Rules of the Game. And entrepreneurs will find ways to be entrepreneurial, and policy will set the rules of the game. So it's either going to be productive or unproductive, maybe even destructive. And I think if, this deep dive, Adam Smith Week, what we're here for is to say, think about the moral purpose that we all have and how that adds value to us as people. And Anton Luckey is an example. He was an entrepreneur and he was doing other things, and somewhere a light just went off reading Plato, right? And so anyway, I could go on. This is Brian. Thank you again. I know we've got some questions in the hopper here, so I'm going to turn it over to Pete because I would probably just stumble over them. But, thank you again.
Thanks, Rob. That's great. Great to talk to you.
You too.
We do have a handful of questions here that are popping in, so I do want to go ahead and ask you some of these. So I'm going to start with one from one of our students. We'd like to give them priority. So this is from one of our students, Alec Patsy. It says, in the case of Anton Lucky or Cafe Momentum, how do you think we can shift away from the stigma associated with prison or juvenile detention outside of a shift in thinking, what action steps do you think are necessary to organize or take to empower individuals? How do we get rid of that stigma?
It's a great question. And in terms of stigma, I think that there is a ton of opportunity to celebrate the contributions of people who have been written off or excluded, often through unjust laws that basically make criminal a lot of things that shouldn't be criminal. But I think so what I mean by that is, let's tell the stories, right? Let's tell the stories of the contributions that people are making, and then let's extrapolate and say, but those are the folks that have struggled against these barriers. Imagine how many people could be contributing in that way, but for those laws that are preventing them. Something like a third, 1 out of 3, 1 out of 4, depending on how you define it. But a lot of people in this country have a criminal record. We make it very difficult for people in this country with a criminal record to succeed. You do the math. I mean, those are tens of millions of people that, if we're not wholesale excluding them from contributing, we're making it very difficult for them to contribute to their fullest based on what they have to offer. So let's stop doing that, right? And I think a way to get rid of that stigma is to celebrate what people have been able to accomplish. But I want to be quick on this, but I want to more fully answer your question. We think that these problems require a comprehensive approach. You've got to invest in solutions across those key institutions of society that Rob and I talked about. So that means solutions that change laws. And certainly we're involved in that, trying to get rid of laws that shouldn't be on the books in the criminal justice system, sentencing reform, prison reform, decriminalization, that sort of thing. But you got to do more than that. You got to invest in community organizations that help people to make the transition out of prison. The recidivism rate in this country is ridiculously high. It doesn't need to be. Organizations we invest in take it from like 50% in some areas down to less than 2%. These are solvable problems. The business community's got a huge role to play. Best way for people to get their lives in order and to succeed is to get a job. So let's help businesses to hire people with criminal records, for instance, because it's not charity. You're going to help that person, but they're going to help your business as productive employees. And then ultimately, you got to invest in education, both improving the K through 12 system so that fewer people feel like their only opportunity is crime, and then that they go into the prisons, or by investing in university research, like what a lot of you guys do. It's a great program at Arizona State University that studies best practices for prison reform and for criminal justice reform. And through elevating that kind of scholarship, you're seeding solutions all over the country. So long answer, but it's a great question. It's a comprehensive approach that can really break through some of these big problems.
So you mentioned education, Brian, so let's take this question that deals with that. So Adam Allen asks, regarding social entrepreneurship and education, what sort of paradigm shifts are needed in this system, and how can you apply those sort of market-based bottom-up solutions to the education system that's largely centrally controlled by government entities? Wouldn't this inherently lend itself towards ending up becoming centrally bureaucratic controls? How would you shift towards the decentralized problem solving that we want good examples of?
That's a tough one, right? I mean, I get in trouble saying this to a bunch of educators, but if you traveled back 1,000 years in time and you went into a university, it wouldn't look all that different from a lot of the places where you guys work. And you can't say that about a lot of aspects of our society. This is an institution, education, that is very ripe for productive disruption, right? There's got to be a better way, but there are a lot of barriers, public choice barriers to a large degree that lock the system in place. And so, the kind of paradigm shift I think is going to require, again, that comprehensive approach that similar to what I just described in the criminal justice system, investing across each institution. But right now, I think there's a huge chance to facilitate that kind of change, because people all across the country are realizing that their current situation is not good. Right. And unfortunately, that's because of the COVID crisis. But there's a lot of parents that are paying attention now, that in a way that they hadn't before, because they're struggling to figure out what am I going to do, because my current options aren't open. And so supporting alternatives that challenge some of those barriers that tend to lock in of failing status quo, right? Challenging things like where kids go to school, right? Things like residential assignment that locks kids in bad schools, for instance. Well, Sal Khan's solution that we're supporting called schoolhouse.world, kids can go to school in a digital environment, which is not panacea, but it challenges where they go to school, challenging who can teach, right? Sal's platform empowers people who have mastered a skill but haven't necessarily achieved a credential, to pairs them up with cohorts of students, challenging what students learn, right? Let's give them options and let students and families choose, which way they want to learn a certain topic or a subject. And then challenging what counts to get into the next level of your life, whether that's college or a different path forward. Sal, again, just to use this one example, he's working with the University of Chicago to enable them to accept the mastery credentials that his platform gives students, rather than the typical sort of credits that come out of a traditional high school, say. That's one innovation, challenging those 4 barriers that have been so instrumental in locking in a system that just frankly isn't serving students very well. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to, again, productively disrupt a system that is ripe for improvement in a way that does take into consideration a lot of the barriers you're talking about, but doesn't rely on a top-down approach to do it. It's empowering people like Sal, those parents, those students from the bottom up.
Can I add something on that, Pete?
Sure, real quick, Rob, because we do have a lot.
There is so pods, for example, the pandemic, of course, has blown open, as you said. I know there's someone in Arizona, a social entrepreneur, who is helping parents of 4 assemble pods, and he's taken this all over the United States. And that's easier to do in certain states than others. So in terms of policy reform, some states are very open to it, others are not so much.
Yeah,
that's
but
all.
I'll give you a sense of the magnitude of change. There's 23 states that are considering reforms to the way that they administer their K-12 education systems right now. In a typical year, if you saw 2 or 3, that would be a pretty exciting year. There's a huge opportunity to make productive change to help empower students to do better that we haven't seen before.
So I'm going to just comment on this more so than ask this question, and that is just that you've one of the people asked to better explain top-down versus bottom-up theory and what this means. And so this whole idea that parents are coming together and finding a solution to what they consider to be a problematic education system is what we mean by the bottom-up, as opposed to, say, the school district trying to reform itself and trying to then say, this is how we're going to educate, and putting out what is often, and this is the thing that people don't realize, a one-size-fits-all system, right? It fails to recognize the individual talents, and both within school districts, within teachers, within students, right, that we could do. So I just want to clarify that. Let me, here's an interesting question, I think, here from Cheryl Presley. It says, have you faced any issues with someone in your program that's failed, and you didn't give up on that person, and you want to try to get that person back on track?
Absolutely. If you're not failing, you're probably not pressing the bounds far enough, right? We're trying to break new ground, which means a lot of trial and error. And as Charles Koch would say, with the emphasis on error. So, there's plenty of organizations that we've supported for all the right reasons that haven't been able to accomplish what they set out to accomplish. That's okay. We took that journey with them. Where we can, we try to, learn from that experience and build more into their strengths. Some cases that work, some cases it doesn't. I think take it to an individual level. When you practice these principles within an organization, Rob and I talked a little bit about market-based management in a business. Think about designing a role for an employee. If that employee is not able to succeed in that role, but she exhibits a contribution mindset, which is a shorthand for the kind of values that you want in your company, somebody who's trying to find ways to apply her talents to create value in the company. Her failure is our failure too, right? We had her in the wrong role. And so let's learn from that. Hopefully we've got a better sense for what her comparative advantage is relative to the others in our company. And let's design a role that really does build on her gifts, empowers her to contribute in ways that can benefit her and benefit the company. I think that you take that approach to everybody, whether it's in a business or in society. Nobody's a throwaway kid, right? Nobody is somebody to write off. Everybody has a gift and an opportunity to contribute if we work hard at finding how to build on their gifts.
So Rob's colleague, Andy Weinbach, has an interesting question here. He says, does your organization ever work with local governments to accomplish a mission?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what we put forward in the book is the idea that each one of these institutions has a critical role to play in the mix of society, right? And the goal of society is to try to find new and better ways for people to live well together. And government's got a critical role. So it's a critical role, it's a limited role, but a critical one nevertheless. And so, yeah, I mean, local governments that are, that are involved in important things like public safety, the provision of public goods to the extent that the market isn't providing them. There's a right way to do that and a wrong way to do that, and it's the same principles that apply that we describe as the principles of human progress in society. Are those policies limited and geared to empowering people, or are they treating people like problems from the top down, and so creating barriers, whether they're well-intentioned or not?
So right along with that, Adam Paquette asks, what are some steps we can do as individuals in places like Charleston or Myrtle Beach to make these small yet valuable changes happen?
Well, the argument we make in the book is that each of us has a role to play, right? There's no cavalry coming. The problems in our country are our problems, and we've all got to find out how we can contribute to the solutions. And so we say, if you're a teacher and you're teaching to the test and you're sort of putting everybody through the same program, stop doing that, right? Find a different way to really invest in, helping each one of your students to realize their gift. If you're a business owner and you're treating your employees like cogs in a wheel and you're sort of telling them what to do, and instead of empowering them to find better ways to contribute in the company, consider the alternative, right? Your business is going to do better, and so are your employees, and so is society. If you're somebody who's enamored of public policy, that's where your vocation is, that's what you're excited about, rather than focusing on yelling at the other side, maybe have a cup of coffee with somebody who represents a different perspective, and spend that time searching for common ground rather than just kind of shouting at each other. So I think the more that we do that based on the proximity to the problem that we're trying to solve, the local knowledge and the practical knowledge that we can bring to the solution through that spontaneous order, as Rob flagged, that's ultimately how we're going to solve these big problems.
So Russell Payton asks, I think, a really nice question here. He says, what about scaling the concept that's used at Cafe Momentum in Dallas, so that's repeated all over the country? To what degree, we talk about local knowledge, to what degree can a lot of these programs potentially be scaled?
Yeah, well, that's the opportunity. And I think absolutely they can. And so I mentioned the Phoenix example, for instance. Phoenix is going to, if successful and there's a plan in place, it's going to be the biggest program of its type in the country. And the trick there is, it's not just that they'll serve 1 million people. I mean, there's 40 million people that have struggled with addiction or of one form or another in our country. So 1 million is not going to solve the problem, but it's going to facilitate a paradigm shift. Once people hear about the Phoenix and the approach that they take, an empowerment approach rather than a top-down control approach, whether they're family members or themselves, if they're struggling, go to the Phoenix itself, they're not going to settle for that failed top-down approach. And it's the same thing with Cafe Momentum. We're working with the NFL to help bring Cafe Momentum to other cities. So some people say maybe the 30 or so cities that have an NFL team. That would be extraordinary. But again, there's criminal justice systems that need reform, juvenile justice systems in a lot more cities than that. But it's that demonstration project. We're showing people that there's a better way, and that's going to catalyze action where they look at the way that their city does it. And whether or not they start a restaurant, they're not going to be able to sleep, right? They're not going to be able to settle for a system that treats people like throwaway kids. They're going to be inspired to practice the principles of a free and open society in a way that's most appropriate to them, to their situation and themselves based again on that local knowledge. So we're setting out for nothing short of paradigm shifts. We don't believe there's a one size fits all way to do all of these, but we do believe that what unites all of these examples in the books is that they're examples of practicing the principles of human progress, principles that you guys have, spent your career helping us to better understand. And if we can enliven people to do that, inspire them to do that in their own way, I mean, ultimately that's what's required for a better society.
So I'm gonna make this the last question. And it comes from one of our students, Emily Cook. What's your advice for us, the students, in a top-down world? How can we implement these bottom-up approaches on our campus lives and our future career paths?
I mean, it's a great way to end the conversation, because as I said at the top, I think the work that you guys are doing, both the faculty at these centers, the students that have decided to associate and spend your college or your graduate student career working through these ideas, you're doing some of the most important work out there. So I think the answer is do the right thing, right? Practice these principles, help find new and better ways to apply them to the problems that are truly holding people back, and be happy warriors, right, for these ideas. Invite people who don't share these ideas into productive conversations, not with the goal of convincing them, but with the goal of, having them walk away learning something, and you too. But I think the more people, I mean, look, I'll slip in a Hayek quote. I did spend 14 years at George Mason University, right? I mean, I think we have to take Hayek's charge seriously. We have to once again make the building of a free and open society an intellectual adventure. And as he said, a deed of courage. And that is ultimately what you all, as I take it, are engaged in. And so, I think what you're doing is some of the most important stuff that's happening in the country. And, I'm grateful that you're doing it.
Well, with that, Rob, Brian, I want to thank you both. Brian, thank you for your time today. Thank you for an incredibly engaging conversation. Rob, thank you for helping to organize this event and put this all together. Let me just do a couple of housekeeping things of reminding people that our next event is tonight at 7 o'clock with Bart Wilson. It's being sponsored by the Center for the Study of Economic Liberty at Arizona State University, which Brian mentioned as one of his, as a place that's doing some great work. Let me also sort of tie this to some of the things that we're going to be doing later on this week. We mentioned educational reform, and that's actually going to be the topic of conversation tomorrow. We're going to talk about COVID and its effects on the education system tomorrow afternoon with Phil Magnus and Corey DeAngelis. So tune in for that for more of this conversation of sort of how we can maybe reform education from bottom-up solutions and the impacts that COVID has had on that. But I do want to thank you both for participating today. I want to thank everybody who came out today. Again, you can find if you go to our webpage at go.cfc.edu, you can find the remaining schedule of events and still register for those. And I encourage you to do that. We're honored to have both of you participate today, and thank you again, Brian and Rob, for everything that you're doing, and Brian for everything that you're doing with the Charles Koch Foundation and Stand Together. We appreciate that work and the work that you're doing.